So, Candace, you're in the top of my screen, so let's start with you. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. Well, so my name is Candace Avalos. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm running for position 1. I'm originally from Virginia, so I actually moved here in 2013 from Northern Virginia, where I grew up, and I went to college at James Madison University, which is in Harrisonburg, Virginia. I went to undergrad and grad school there. And I actually started out my career as a high school teacher. So I taught English as a second language to 10th graders and post seniors. We had a special program for them. And then I went back into education to do what I do now, which is college student administration. So that's what my Master of Education is in. I'm half Black, half Latina, so I call myself Black Tina. I've been saying that a lot on the trail, and I'm first generation Black Tina too, because my mom was brought here from Guatemala with her parents brought her from Guatemala in the 1970s, and then on my Black side, they grew up in deep South Virginia. So both of those, sides of my personal narrative really inform my values and my feelings about democracy and about why I feel passionately about running as well. And I've spent my career as an educator advising student government and Greek life. I work at Portland State University, and I teach classes about civic engagement, leadership, that kind of thing. So, and I am bilingual. I speak Spanish as well. Spanish was my first language. I learned English when I started school. So.
Great, thank you. Tim? Tim, I think you're muted, sorry.
Yeah, am I back on? Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry, I'm not familiar with this system. So yeah, my name is Tim Du Bois. I'm from Michigan, West Michigan. I've lived in Chicago and Las Vegas, and I've been here for quite a while. I am a citizen candidate here who also happens to be a father of 2 young boys. There's a soon-to-be second grader and soon-to-be kindergartner. Through those experiences, I've become very familiar with how difficult to be to get your kids into daycare via availability, and I'm a citizen candidate who's also a carpenter and woodworker for the last 18 years, and I think that's made me very familiar with what it's like to be a union or non-union. In my case, carpenter, and all the challenges we face. I know what it's like to get your lunch from a convenience store, and what it's like to shower after work every day. I'm a citizen candidate who also is about to complete a master's degree in urban regional planning. I've been back at school for 9 years, working full-time and raising my kids. I think that master's degree is incredibly important. It's related to the intersection between human behavior and the built-in environment, something that is really important. A citizen candidate who also believes that the city auditor's documents are sort of being neglected, and they're one of the more valuable documents that we get. And then most importantly, I'm just, I think my biggest strength here in this race is that I'm not part of the political machine here in Portland. I think the machine has led us to a fiscal cliff, and that was before COVID-19 came around. And I think that's something that needs to get reversed. So I'm incredibly excited to be here. I, like everyone in this race, I hope to be able to call them friends at some point. I call them friends now, but maybe a little bit more close to them. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, Tim, before we move on to Carmen, I'm just curious, we've been reporting a lot on construction that's going on during the COVID-19 period. You said you are or are not a member of the Carpenters Union?
I am not a member of the Carpenters Union. I've been residential, small scale, and there's no union that really represents us.
Got it. Great. Thanks, Carmen.
Hi, so you might, some things might be familiar to you already from previous conversations, but I'm running for position number 1, Portland City Council. And I grew up in a hardworking Mexican family that instilled values of taking care of each other and respect for hard work. Most of my life, actually all of my life, I've been in Oregon, except for a few years in Washington State. And grew up and graduated from Glencoe High School, went on to University of Oregon, where I became politicized and very active in student government. And after that, came back to Portland. And a lot of my experiences in college and also in my family led me to work in the public sector. First in some nonprofits, and then for local elected officials, and then as the ED for one of the leading Latino community-based nonprofits in Oregon, which is where I am right now. And I'm running because I believe that communities in every part of the city deserve to be heard and to have a voice on city council, and not just those who have traditionally had access or can afford to or have access to power. I had an early experience when I was a policy staffer for Serena Cruz that drove this home for me. And it's really shaped my perspective ever since. It was when I got a phone call from a constituent who was looking for some help with a legal document, and she spoke Spanish. And this stuck with me for several reasons. First, her experience resonated with mine. She was looking for someone to help her in Spanish, and it resonated with the experience my family had and reminded me how they had to navigate the systems at a time when they probably had fewer or no supports. So that really impacted me. So I really wanted to help her. And then second, how it mattered that we were there in that moment and that she called us because, in her words, porque ustedes me comprenden, which means you understand me and you get me. And how that landed on me was that you understand my lived experience, you'll treat me with dignity and respect. And the thing of it was, she didn't even live in Multnomah County. She lived in Central Oregon, but she called Serena Cruz's office in Multnomah County because she knew that the chances were pretty high that she would be treated with dignity and respect there. And I know that's a simple story, but it's one that really relates to how I think that everybody wants to feel. They want to be heard. They want to feel like they have value to their government. And whether you're this woman, Senora Morales, or you're an active neighbor or you're a business owner in this community, I think that people have that right to access to their city government. And especially in these times, we need leaders who can hit the ground running. And I have 10 years experience running a growing organization. I've managed and led large-scale projects. I've overseen large budgets. And I've also understand the importance of working collaboratively with your partners and your funders, and also know how to take feedback and challenges and turn it into something better. So I believe I'm the best choice for voters because I can hit the ground running, and I'm an experienced manager, collaborator, and I have a strong grounding in the community.
Great, thank you. So let's draw on that a little bit. Candace, I believe you've been at PSU 6 or 7 years, is that correct?
Yes, 7 years.
So what is it, or what was it about this opportunity that made you say, you've obviously, I presume, thrived at PSU. It's a great university, probably a really good job. What was it that made you, A, want to do this, and B, think that you were prepared to do it?
Mm-hmm. Well, so like I said, I work with student government leaders on campus, and that is because I started my path and my voice in student government. So, throughout my young adulthood, I have really put a lot of time into thinking about what is my role in our current politics and government, and how can I make a difference? And my original path was I could be an educator, and I felt strongly about how I bring up that next generation of leaders. And so in my work at PSU students are really politically engaged. They're super connected to what's going on beyond the campus, which is something that I wasn't familiar with coming from James Madison University, where it's a little bit more closed off, and everybody, their parents paid for their tuition, right? And PSU students, they really reflect a lot of the issues that we're dealing with, how we're bringing young people up, making them heard in this economy, and make sure they're not left behind by it. And so I decided to kind of put into practice what I was preaching to my students, and I got involved in the city. And I decided to join the Citizen Review Committee, where I currently serve as the acting chair. And in that work, it was a combination of doing that police accountability work and seeing the dysfunction on the back end and how we were not able to make changes that we felt had community-wide support, but it was getting, stalled in City Hall in a lot of ways. And then just overall, I actually joined the Emerge Oregon program last year as well, which is a training program for Democratic women who want to run for office. And that was around when Amanda Fritz announced that she was retiring. So I kind of put all of these thoughts together and thinking about my experiences helping young leaders, see the future of politics and what that's going to look like, what it's going to entail to engage this new generation in our politics and make sure that they feel heard and represented. And through my experiences with that, not only with, what is good government? What makes good government? How do you be transparent, ethical leaders? How do you lead a value-based budget process? I oversee the $18 million allocation of student fees I found at PSU. And so I felt like I didn't see my voice reflected. I feel as a younger person and the youngest person in this race that I definitely feel left behind by the economy and left out of the conversation in City Hall. And I wanted to see that lived experience shared, not only as a young person, as a Black Tina, as somebody that has been engaged, but hasn't felt that I've seen leaders that represent me and that are paving a way for people like me to be in government. So that's kind of what drew me to it. And I feel that I have a lot of experience in being a collaborative leader, being somebody that is engaging with the 21st century tools. And that's really what I want to see for City Hall is how we're leveraging that technology to make it easier to engage with the community. And I think I have a lot of ideas and skills to offer in that world. So that's why I decided to run.
Great. Tim, same question. Your background, as you pointed out, is not a traditional one for a council candidate. And I think I read on your website or on your voters pamphlet statement that you've been involved in your neighborhood association. Have you had other levels? Tell us about that, and also whatever else you have done in terms of civic engagement since you've been here.
So I was a board member for 2 years here in Smile, which is Selwood Moreland, Westmoreland. Beyond that, I would say that I've been just trying to grow my own life and family. And I'll tell you, raising 2 kids, going to school and full-time work, you really don't have a lot of opportunity to really tack on more. So I'm a little bit embarrassed that I don't have more to offer. I am still engaged in my community. Being a carpenter at my level, I've been in well over 1,000 different people's houses. I've talked with them. I've gotten in trouble for talking too much because I love to hear people's stories. I like to they come from and help but learn all that just because their pictures are on the wall. And so there's definitely a perspective there. And additionally, I deal with suppliers and I go to, I get lumber yards. I apologize. And I know there's just people who work in there that they don't feel that they're not represented. They just don't feel like government is a thing that has done anything for them. And I get it because there's a disconnect between primarily white collar elected officials, which is, I don't want, it's not blue collar, white collar, one's better or the other. I'm in my own transition in my own life. I think they're both good and they have important roles. But definitely there are people in this city who work here, live here, been here a long time, and they just don't feel connected in any way. And I think that, that's a perspective I can bring. It can be easy to, talk like you like your blue collar working class people, and then it's followed by laws that make their life a little bit. And I have that connection. So I think that's something I can bring. I know.
Okay. Let me interrupt can I interrupt just
Sure.
for a second? Sorry.
Please.
So in your work on the Smile Neighborhood Association, I wonder whether did that coincide with Commissioner Udaley's Office of Civic and Community Life's attempt to sort of revamp the neighborhood association structure, or? Either way, whether it
Uh,
coincided or not, what did you make of her effort to redo the neighborhood association
Sure.
structure?
Uh, it did not. I do believe it was about to start rolling out. That the conversation started about when I was just about when I was done or after I was done. I think there is definitely a need to evaluate the role of our neighborhood associations. I think they offer a lot, and so they're not something that should go away for sure. I know working with Portland Clean Air, we use them to we work with them to negotiate with some of our larger polluters in town and try to get diesel filters. They're great at organizing park events for families and just anyone else in the neighborhood and garbage cleanup. What I will say though is it certainly is very frustrating when anything that has to do with land use goes before them, and then all of a sudden everyone starts showing up to the meetings, and it's usually not constructive. It's usually neighbors who feel that their voice can kill a project even if it is fully within the law, and I think that is a problem. That is making it hard for Portland to adapt to the changing times. And I get also that it comes from fear, it comes from nostalgia. I think there's ways that we can figure things out that doesn't disenfranchise their interests and what's important to them, while also just acknowledging that we have laws, we have rules, and when a developer follows them, that should be what we ask of them, not to be subjected to subjective frustration from neighbors. So.
Okay, great, thanks. Carmen, same question for you. I don't know how closely you've watched the Office of Community and Civic Life as it has tried to reform the neighborhood associations or tried to take them in a different direction. Curious as to your thoughts on how that process has gone and how you might have done it differently.
Mm-hmm. I think that there is absolutely a role for neighborhood associations. Absolutely. They have a tremendous history. They have a network. They take on a lot of the unique, characteristics of their neighborhoods, which is fine. I also think, though, there is room to make the circle bigger. And I don't think that they should have any more power than anybody else or any less power than any other group. I think the intent of the Office of Civic Life was absolutely to try and broaden and be more inclusive and make it a picture, an inclusive picture of what Portland has become today. And I think that we should be doing that anyway every few years. And one of the things that I know, having been in the building before, is that there were attempts and there was interest by the neighborhood association to broaden that circle as well. And when I worked under Mayor Potter, he started with the neighborhood associations a project called Community Connect that was very much about bringing more equity into the work and changing the nature of the work and broadening that circle. So in that respect, I know that there's interest within some of the neighborhood associations, and they're not all the same, and they have different capacities.
Sure.
And some work very just like any nonprofit or any organization. Some are high functioning, some are less so. But the point of it is, it's about broadening and asset building and taking what you have, looking at the gap, and how do we start building off of those things to make it a more functioning system that includes more people. And I think that was the intent. I probably would have approached it differently in terms of doing more relationship building and having more communication along the way, because communication or trust works. I lost my thought about trust builds at the speed of communication, and trust builds at the speed of relationships. So you have to put the time in so that people can understand where you're coming from, and so that the relationship can hold you and assume your intent is good and forward thinking and building. And I don't know that this project had enough time, actually. I wonder if with more time and better communication, maybe we would have arrived at a different place.
Do you think that the fundamental critique that some people have offered, that the neighborhood associations are too white, too rich, and too rigid is correct or not?
I don't think that that's a fair blanket statement for every single neighborhood association. I think that they've had different experiences trying to do different things, and others haven't been as inclusive. And that's a fact. And those are things that we've heard from neighborhood associations in the past as well. I reject like labeling with any blanket, statement on any one group or of stakeholders or participants. But what we need to do is find the things that we all care about and that we are all aligned about. And that's what we take, and that's what we start building together about how we want it to look together.
Okay. All right. I want to ask all three of you the same question. There are two. Sorry.
First? Can I answer that first? Real
No.
quick?
Sorry. Don't want to be rude,
Okay.
but just in the
No worries.
context of trying to move things along, there are two measures on the May ballot that will ask Portland voters to open their wallets. One is a renewal of the gas tax, which is a 4-year measure. We passed it 4 years ago. It's expired. The city's asking to pass another one. It would raise roughly $75 million over 4 years. The second is a homeless services measure that Metro is putting on the ballot that would raise somewhere around $250 million a year for 10 years, probably a lot less now because the economy has tanked, but you all are familiar with those two measures. If you could only vote for one of them, which would you vote for and why? Tim, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, thank you. If I could only vote for one, I would vote for the gas tax. I think it's one of those situations where it's your classic Pigouvian tax, in that if you don't like it, you drive less, and then you don't have to pay it as much. I do support raising more money for homeless. However, I think it's first prudent upon us to show that we can use the money we already have better, and we are not doing very well. So I think before we ask for money for that, we need to show that we're responsible with the money we currently have.
Carmen?
I would absolutely vote for the homeless services tax. We're in the midst of the culmination of decades of disinvestment by the federal government, by declining resources at a state level, by lack of mental health supports and substance abuse and treatment options for a growing population that is increasingly being subject to income gap. It's literally math. If rent is like $1,500 a month and you get a check for $800, how are you possibly going to make that difference? And if you layer that on with like being vulnerable in the community, your odds are really, go down exponentially. And it's just, we're in crisis at this point. And so we have.
Carmen, have you been involved in the Metro, any of the Metro committees that put this together, you personally?
I haven't been involved in the Metro committees, but our organization sits on the coalition. We're part of that coalition, and we've endorsed that coalition. We're also
right. So, I guess I'm curious what the metrics are that you see that you when friends or people associated with your organization say, "Gee, I'm not sure I understand the measure." What's your one sentence explanation of what will actually be delivered? Because obviously we know there's a huge need, and we know it's a very expensive need. The question is, what do we actually get?
Well, voters have already said that housing is urgent, and we've already voted on bonds to that effect. So that's there.
Okay.
You cannot keep people who are chronically houseless or, one check away from being homeless, or people who are recently homeless. You cannot keep them housed if you don't have wraparound supports. We need the supports to have our most vulnerable in the community to remain housed. It's not enough just to give them a place to live and then, put them in housing and then we let go. They're going to be back on the street, still with suffering from the same needs. And it's our job to figure out a local solution to make sure that we provide wraparound supports to keep them housed over the long term. Yes, it's expensive, but it's what we need to do.
Okay, great. Thank you. Candace, same question. Of the two money measures, which would you prioritize and why?
I would definitely prioritize the homeless houseless services measure. for a lot of the reasons that Carmen said. And I think that, again, we have put some investment already for more housing, but we don't have enough housing for people overnight. And we have to put more money into how we're addressing the things that are keeping people chronically houseless. And I think that that's, especially in the age of COVID-19, we're going to be at risk of having more people that are going to be ending up on the streets. And so we need to pump money into that. And I agree that it's hard for voters to, when they already put in a bunch of money and they're not necessarily seeing how those dollars are going towards that, and then we're putting another measure in front of them. But I think what we need to explain is that, this is what these dollars are for. They're for these safety nets. They're for helping people, vulnerable people. And we could all be, in that position. So I think that we need to put that money there, because it's going to have the long-term effect that we are looking for, which is hopefully getting people those services they need to not be chronically houseless.
City officials have told us that they think that the general fund budget is going to have a $100 million hole in it next year from the COVID-19 crisis. That's a roughly $600 million general fund budget out of the all funds budget of more like $5 billion. But the general fund budget, as you know, is where the city has discretion. So we're going to have to find $100 million in cuts. I would like you to each tell me where the first place you would look for those cuts is, either what function, what bureau, or what place you would look to find savings. Tim, are you still with us? I'm not seeing Tim. So Candace, let's start with you on that, and then I think Tim may have dropped off, but I'm not sure. Candace, go ahead.
No, I'm here. No one hears me?
Tim is still here.
I can see, yeah. Oh, I can see you now. I couldn't see you for a while. Now I can see you again. But in any case, Tim, did you hear that question? Where are you going to find cuts for next year's budget?
Yeah. So
okay. Well, let's let Candace go first on
sure.
this. So I just want to make sure you're with us.
That's fine.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead, Candace.
Okay. I think obviously that's the big question that we're going to be facing, and all of the people that are going to be coming on to city council, that's going to be their first thing on the table is how are we going to make up this revenue? It's obviously challenging too to say, oh, it's going to come from this place or this place, because a lot of times that means people's jobs. And that's what concerns me the most, is how we're going to be able to, especially now when so many people are being left without their jobs. I really want to see us put effort into protecting the city from losing more jobs. I think that ultimately, capital projects, we're probably going to need to put a pause on some of those, and the affordable housing ones, obviously. But I think that is probably going to be the number one place I'm going to be looking at. And I think that overall, too, the way that the budget is structured, it's really hard to move money around. It's really hard for the bureaus to be collaborative and making decisions like, okay, we can let this go here, and then we can put some money over here. And I think that that's where we struggle every year with the budget, where the bureau is being managed by each commissioner. I don't see the strategic vision that is saying, how can we negotiate between these and make sure that we're not all just fighting for our fiefdoms. So I think that, it's going to be challenging because obviously we don't want to lose people's jobs, but I think we're going to need to take a pause on, any vanity projects, and we're going to need to work more on putting money back into small businesses. I'd really like to see us be more flexible with those funds. I know that Prosper Portland has been offering some resources, but the news just hit today that, the federal money for small businesses is all out. And that's really concerning to know that they, on the federal level, they're saying there's not enough. And I think that's not true. And I think that they need to put more money into it, another stimulus package for that, because we're really going to need that support locally to have the federal government really invest in that. But I think we can be more flexible within our budget lines to put money back into the economy.
Great. Tim, where would you look to start to find this $100 million in savings that the city needs to find?
So this is going to be, what do you say, $100 million question, right? So this actually, for me, goes back a little bit further than COVID in that, we have a city that has already shown that they're sort of irresponsible with their funds. And I would almost take the same strategy I would have done regardless. It'd be looking at every budget, and it literally needs to be every budget. And we need to go in there and we need to figure out where the waste is. And, the auditor already sort of does that. But now we have to kind of go much deeper than that. And there's, ideas such as every fiscal year, a budget, every bureau's budget starts at zero, and they have to justify their budget as opposed to it's building off of whatever was last year. We should put incentives in there to make sure employees in those departments can try to help find cost savings, and such that maybe they get a little bit of a kickback for what they can reduce off the last year's budget. We have to be creative. There's gonna, I think there might end up being maybe reductions in salaries so we can keep people on staff in an emergency way, and that when things start to return back to normal, we can bring those salaries back up. But to say it's any one budget, there's not going to be a line item that's not going to get touched. And frankly, I would volunteer a reduction in my own salary when I get elected, if that happens. So yeah, there's not a where do you find it? It's everywhere. We're going to have to be very prudent in our budgets for quite a while now.
Okay, Carmen, how about you?
Finally,
You've worked in the building. Tim, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to make the comment that Candace mentioned vanity projects and that they're going to have to stop. And frankly, I think that should be a statement that's almost always the case. We should not be spending public funds on vanity projects.
Okay, Carmen, your turn. You, as the long ago staffer to Fish and Potter, you know the building. So tell me where the first place you would look to find some of this $100 million is.
So first, I would assess it a little differently. Instead of back ending into cuts, I would first thinking about it. What are our priorities? What are the essential things that the city needs to keep to preserve and to keep functioning? I think we first need to focus on our core mission and prioritize fire and life safety issues. We need to make sure that our first responders are absolutely supported, because in this time, the last thing that residents need is to feel like they can't count on those core mission services from the city. Utilities, water, sewer, even energy, making sure that those things are fundamental, foundational things that we know that we're responsible for. Infrastructure dependability. And then as a part of this, housing is really critical and is part of the mission of our city. No resident should have to worry about any of those things at its core mission to be really disrupted. We need to keep these vital services that keep people alive, and that includes housing. And then I think we need to look at scenario planning. We need to look in the short term through the recovery lens at all times. We need to prioritize our cash flow for small business owners and workers first. And we need to, when I think about scenario planning, and I mentioned this in another, time when we were all together about, in my own organization, we've had many, we've had to ride the ups and downs of funding and having to make decisions about what we preserve and then what needs to go away. And we do it through a lens of what are things that are mission central, what are core to our mission and are vital, and it will really have a disruptive impact on the community. Other factors include, like, what are things that are really important things, but we can turn them off and then turn them on again when we have more capacity to do those. And then what are the things that we really can't afford to do without, because if we disrupt it, we just know that we need to let it go. Those are the kind of lenses that we have to look at when we're thinking about the scenario planning, and then be prepared for those discussions over the long term, and then having to keep revisiting them because the situation is changing daily. So that's how I would approach it. I don't know yet, because I think we need that first information to be able to determine then, based on what our priorities are together, what should be cut and what should be rolled back and what should be put on pause.
So no specifics at all. I mean, we know the city economists, the mayor, have said $100 million. That's a 15 to 20% general fund cut. Mm-hmm. There's no place that you could identify that you would start, or no strategy.
I think the strategy I would use is what's essential, and we preserve that first. And what things are not essential, those are the things that we need to like look at and see if they're not essential. I
Do
think
you have any ideas about what those non-essential things are?
yeah, I do think that we need to look at some planning projects. I do think that we need to look at special projects that involve multiple collaborations over the long term. They're going to have to be put on hold. Capital projects will have to be reassessed, but we need to be careful about which capital projects we choose to put on hold and which don't, because some involve housing, some involve actual real-time things that are going to impact fire life and safety issues that we need as core infrastructure for the city to keep the city also moving and functioning at its most basic level. But those that are longer term or further off or still in early stages, we'll have to put those on hold or cut them. I think at a last resort, we would have to cut jobs. That's not ideal, because those are jobs that contribute to our economy and keep people feeding their families and employed. So at all possible costs, make that a last resort. But I anticipate that's going to have to take a huge hit too.
Okay. I'd like you all to tell us one mistake that you have made and how that mistake has made you smarter or more effective and would help you be an effective city commissioner. And try and be brief. Carmen, we'll start with you on this one.
Just one. I've made had a lot of lessons over my career. One that comes pretty quickly to mind is probably in my first or second year at Latino Network. And I came in really thinking I had these really great ideas. And one of them was to rebrand the organization. And I wanted to change all these things. And I knew it would work. And I had seen it from the outside. And I essentially was moving too fast. And I think the staff gave me a big reality check about that. And I learned very quickly in that instance the importance of making sure that I check in with the people that are most impacted in the decisions that are going to be made, and that there's wisdom there, and there's a lot of lived experience, and there's a lot of investment and history, and a lot of things that they knew, and expertise that I would never have at that point that I came in with my big shiny idea. And so that really, really was a huge learning lesson for me. And ultimately, having that experience where I basically, got shut down and, had the opportunity to really sit and really listen, truly listen, and be challenged and understand other perspectives, it led us to a better result. And we didn't rebrand, and we did refocus on a different area, and we took that energy and that capacity and we redirected it somewhere else that was long needed. But it was a very big lesson to me about I might think I have the best idea in the world, but is it relevant? We need to make sure that it's it's responsive, that there's a need for it, there's an actual gap. And above all, involve, the people that are most impacted, because these are the folks that are going to live with that decision, whether I'm the director or not. So I actually love that and love to get tested by, testing of ideas.
Great. Candace, what's a mistake that you've made and how would it benefit your constituents if you were elected?
I think the mistakes that I have made as I have learned to be a leader that represents people. So I did student government all through undergrad and grad school, and then now advising them. I have learned that people really want to know what you think. And I know that sounds pretty basic, but I've really, and especially on this campaign trail, that, I've always tried to be the kind of person that I believe that, all of these values, everybody's bringing different values to the table. And, as a leader, I always thought you are supposed to just balance those and not really say where you fall, because you're just leading them through that, right? But I think what I've learned over the years is that my values matter, and it's important to be vocal about those. And that's what people are looking for in their leaders. They want to see you take a stand on something. They want to see you speak your truth. And even if it's not something they agree with, they appreciate the fact that you were honest and you were able to say it. So I think that that's something I've learned in my experience, representing other people. And I think that that will be valuable for me. And what I really want to see out of City Hall, it's definitely one of the reasons that I was running, because I was like, I want to see more people like really stick to what they're saying and really believe in that, even if it doesn't agree with everybody. But then also, of course, you have to be collaborative and you have to be willing to hear that everybody else has something they're standing for. But I think that that's how I've grown the most in the last few years, is to really be definitive in my values and sticking to them when I need to.
Great, thank you. Tim, what's a mistake that you've made that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, so it's not work related, and it goes back to when I was just out of high school. I succumbed to my teenage desire to buy a vanity car. I bought a just kind of an inexpensive Porsche 944, and I thought it was the greatest thing. And it turned out to be a financial disaster that I just threw money and money and money at. And I went from someone who could about just only change oil to learning how to change an entire engine. And I think this is incredibly relevant to what City Council is, in that I made a mistake of buying not a car, I bought a vanity statement. I just needed a car. So I think that's really how city needs to see things. Like, we need more housing, but you know what? It doesn't need to look like the Taj Mahal. It's not about its appearance. And another important lesson I learned was the sunken cost fallacy. I would have been wise to have, when it first started going south, to just get rid of the car, just bring it to the metal recycler. I would have been better off financially. I just kept throwing money at it. And then it derailed my post-high school life, because I was stuck with a huge pile of, well, a huge hole that I kept throwing money into. And I don't want to do that for the voters of Portland, the citizens and residents of Portland. We need to be smart. We need to know when we've made a mistake and course correct. And I think I've learned that lesson, and I absolutely will bring that to City Hall if elected. So
great, thank you. How long did you have the car?
I think I had it about 3 years, and I went through a couple cylinder heads, a whole new engine from a different model Porsche, which was a difficult thing. It's not a fancy car, by the way. If anyone knows this car, it was I could have bought it. It would have cost more to buy a decent Toyota than this car. So it was an epic mistake.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'd like to give you each a chance to ask one of your opponents a question, ideally a substantive question that is a question and not a statement. And whoever gets asked a question, please answer briefly. Tim, we'll start with you. Would you like to ask either of your opponents a question?
Yeah, I would like to ask Carmen a question, if I could. So you run Latino Network, and I know that organization is good, and what you do is a worthwhile cause. Where my question is there seems to be in the public discourse an evaluation of our nonprofits more generally. Are they a good value? And what we're finding is that just cash assistance, nonprofits, just money, or nonprofits that just give money away with fewest strings attached, and in fact are some of the best investment. Do you find that Latino Network, is getting its value? Could it do better if it just took the money and, instead of administrative costs, just gave it to the people who need it?
So you're asking if we were at more of a pass-through and didn't take an administrative cost to administer funds? Is that what you're?
Yeah, so less administrative, which means less like telling or encouraging, telling whatever what the people who you serve, what they actually do with the money or how they actually get it, and instead just, yeah. Is that clear? I'm not always the best the best at answering a very specific question.
Let me see if I understood. So you're asking if it would be better, our participants would be better served if we had less strings on the kind of help that we're providing them.
I think that's a lot of what's
okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I think that that's true. I think, though, that and it makes it very challenging sometimes, because nonprofits are in this very challenged role of having to navigate multiple jurisdictions and different kinds of funding streams, and then braid these funding streams together to provide the most seamless service and resources for the participants that need it. So what ends up happening is the onus, a lot of the times, you know, we try as we can, but then there are all these weird restrictions, and you have to it takes a lot of time and capacity to help participants navigate the different kinds of eligibility for one, you know, rent assistance check, or one check to prevent their energy from being cut off, their lights from being cut off, or for you know, buying some groceries for clients. So those kinds of things, it is challenging, but it's also part of the nature of where that funding stream comes from. And our federal government, sometimes those monies are among the most restrictive monies to get out the door. So yes.
Yeah.
It would be.
Great. Okay. Candace,
Thank you.
Candace, would you like to ask either of your opponents a question?
Sure. So my question is about social media and technology, because I really think that, you know, now too that we're in COVID-19, we're realizing that we're needing to lean more on these digital tools. And I think that it has given us an opportunity to really think about how we're using those tools better to engage the community. And for me too, I really feel that that is how young people engage with each other, and that's the future. And so I really want to see commissioners that are going to be committed to investing in these tools and making sure that young people are heard in City Hall. So how would you do that is my question. And are you committed to really bringing up City Hall to be more tech friendly so that it can be more engaging? And who I asked that to, I mean, I guess I'll ask it to Tim, since Carmen already had a question asked, so.
Sorry, yeah. So I would say I'm not particularly a fan of social media. I've never used it, and since I've picked it up for this campaign, I would say my quality of life has diminished a little bit. So I don't think, I think definitely City Hall needs to get better with technology. That is without a question. I'm not quite convinced that social media is the best platform. I think it plays on this narrative that social media serves a core community function, and I sort of reject that a little bit. Yeah, I don't really have much more to say. It's
That's your opinion. I don't agree with it, but I appreciate it.
Okay, great. Carmen, would you like to ask? Yeah. Carmen, would you like to ask either of your opponents a question?
Sure. So Candace, I know that you're really involved in police reform and community oversight of police reform, and you've done, you know, you've had a lot of like great active engagement there. And I also know that, but from what you've said today, you have a lot of interest in lifting up youth voice and youth engagement. How do you see that youth could be potentially have a role in police reform?
That's a good question. And, you know, I see a lot of the ways that young people engage with the police are on the streets in protests. I have a lens on that, not only as somebody that works with young people and students that are really politically active and care a lot about talking about the things that, you know, they're active about. So I think that, you know, just like anything else, what I want to see is the different commissions that interface with the government. I want to see them doing better recruitment of young people, and that includes the Police Accountability Board. And we actually have been doing a lot better. We just brought in a new group of people, and I think it's going to reflect some younger voices that can, they have a different idea of what the future of policing is going to look like. And especially Black and brown people who have a very different relationship with the police. So overall, yes, I know your question is about police accountability specifically, but I think the larger picture for me is how the city is staffing those commissions and boards that are making these critical policy recommendations about these changes, like police reform. And I want to see us be a better recruiter of that. I want to see more internships coming through City Hall. I want to see more programs that work with community organizations, youth organizations that are bringing those voices in to have an impact on those decisions. It's a good question. Thank you.
Thanks. We have one question that we ask all candidates in this cycle. It's an attempt to put a human face on the COVID-19 pandemic. The question is, what have you done over the past month during the period of social distancing that you will always remember? Candace, we'll start with you, please.
Something I've done that I'll always remember.
Well, let me see if I can help. I didn't introduce that particularly well. One of the best answers came from a candidate who said after he gets off work every day, he drives over to his dad's house, and his dad puts 2 deck chairs up on either side of the driveway and pours them each a glass of whiskey, and they sit. And his dad's hard of hearing, so they yell at each other across the driveway and talk about all the things they used to talk about. So, you know that, or there's another guy who's reading a 1,300-page book that he always wanted to read, and he never thought he would get a chance to. So just things that, you'll remember about this, whether they're funny or serious or tragic, could be almost anything. We're just looking for a very brief snippet of what people's lived experience has been like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there's lots of things definitely that I'd remember. And I think that for me, I was just talking with my boss about this not too long ago. And we were talking about how it's so funny that we've had all of these tools to talk with each other over the internet. And it took now to really use them seriously. And I have connected so much more with people that I haven't been able to talk to because we're like, hey, let's have a Zoom party, let's have a margarita over Zoom, or, my grandparents, they're actually super tech savvy and I'm very proud of them. They're really good about getting on FaceTime and things like that. So I feel like I'm really taking away that I need to slow down. There's always time to connect with my friends. I have a lot of friends from Virginia, where I'm originally from, and I've been able to actually see more of them now. And I'm really going to try to build that better into my habits so that I'm making sure I'm connecting with old friends all the time.
Great, thank you. Carmen, how about you? What's a memorable takeaway from this time?
I would echo a little bit of what Candace said about now that we're having, we have distance between us, really checking in with my loved ones a lot more. I think, when the COVID-19, the criteria and high risk factors came out, and realizing you assess where you fall in those risk factors, you assess where your loved ones fall in those risk factors. And immediately, I think of my parents, and my dad lives in El Paso, so I'm not able to see him. But, quickly I was like, I'm not going to be able to see my dad. And my mom lives in Hillsboro, and, constantly calling them, on the phone with them all the time, ordering groceries for my dad in El Paso so that he will not leave the house, ordering whatever he needs, in fact, to keep him there. And checking in with him. It just has taken on a more poignant tone with me, and realizing our life is fragile and it's precious, and it's really bringing home the importance of taking time to spend with your loved ones now. My mom, I'll just say this one thing too, is that, we constantly are talking all the time, and, I'll run groceries over to her and leave them outside her house. But what I'm going to remember about my mom and me in this time is her passing on all my grandma's recipes to me. So I've learned virtually how to perfect tortillas, and sopa de fideo and some other Mexican food that, I can get by, but I sort of get by, writing on my mom's expertise around those things. But this is a really wonderful way for me to spend time together because it's important. So that's what I'll remember.
You're muted, Nigel.
Uh-oh.
Now can you hear me? Tim.
Muted, but I'm back. So,
Tim.
Yeah. Okay. So very fortunate to before the larger, more restrictive lockdown happened. My parents drove here from Michigan to be with me and my wife and kids, and it's been a blessing. They'll be here probably in total a month, and I haven't spent a solid month with my parents for 16 years straight, and it's been wonderful. And one of the funnest things that we do is we go to our large vacant parking lot across the street and we play wiffle ball with my two kids. And we've now played probably 6 or 7 games and we've never gotten out of the top of the first because my kids refuse to accept getting out. And so it's fun. So, you know, we're definitely making the best of what we have, and also now have regular cocktail hour, which is, it's definitely something to kind of take a little bit of the edge off of the frustrations and difficulties of working, well, happiness to work, but dealing with remote work and all the other things. So, yeah.
Great.
Take what you
Well,
can.
Good. Well, those are great. Well, thank you all for taking the time today and for doing it over the internet. It was really great to talk to all of you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Right.
Thanks, Candace and Carmen. We'll see you around.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
thanks.